Your hosts have earned a reputation as fierce and effective advocates inside and outside of the courtroom. Our partners are experienced trial attorneys who've been board certified in family law by the Texas Board of Legal Specialization.
Thanks for tuning in to the For Better, Worse, or Divorce podcast, where we provide you tips and insights on how to navigate divorce and child custody situations. I'm Brian Walters. I'm the name partner of Walters Gilbreth PLLC. Today I'm with Patrick Kilbane. He's a partner at Ullman Wealth Partners in Florida, where he serves as a wealth advisor and general counsel. He also leads the firm's divorce advisory group, where he supports high net worth clients before, during, and after the divorce process. He's also author of Moving Forward Confidentially, A Woman's Guide to Navigating the High Net Worth Divorce. We're excited to have you here with us on the podcast today to discuss your experiences and insights into high net worth divorces. I figured you could give us some intro. Of course, the professional stuff's always relevant, but do tell us a little bit about in something interesting and not boring, where'd you grow up or kids or where do you live? I was just out in Florida myself just a short time ago, so I really enjoyed it, by the way. So tell me, let's start with that. What part of Florida do you live in?
Brian, thank you for having me. What a great thing you're doing for people who are considering going through divorces. The podcasts now are such a great resource for people. So good for you. I live in Jacksonville, Florida, which is Northeast Florida on the Atlantic coast. Some people jokingly refer to it as Jacksonville, Georgia, because we're so close to the Georgia state line. But like you, I used to litigate high net worth divorces and sort of have evolved into this next iteration of my career, and really, really enjoy what I'm doing and think I can help quite a bit to anybody who's listening.
Great. Appreciate it. Yeah, I was down in Miami, actually, in sunny Isles Beach is where I was with my family. It's about a month and a half ago, and really enjoyed it. Really enjoyed the Atlantic and all that other good stuff. So appreciate it. Yeah, well, you guys have an NFL team up there, which not many cities can say. You guys are one of the smaller towns that has one, but so be it. And you guys won yesterday, 2 days ago.
With an NFL team in town brings NFL divorces. So I've been involved in a few of those over the years.
I'm sure. Yeah, I tend to be in the bigger cities in Texas for the most part, but yeah, we've got some of the same type of folks who, like all of us, can get themselves into family trouble. So, well, tell me a little bit about your the book that you wrote. I have thought about and even start writing a book or two, and actually even started one at one point a long time ago. It's harder than you think. I think you're just going to sit down and, at least I did, write a book. And it turned out to be so difficult that I didn't write it. But tell me about the one you wrote, the process of it, probably a little bit too, and then why you wrote it, and then all that kind of stuff.
I mean, I wish I could give you a high five through the screen, because my experience was exactly what you described. So, Brian, I felt like, you and I have relevant experience to share with people who are going through a really difficult time. And then now, more than a decade, helping people make financial decisions before, during, and after divorces. What I wanted to do is meld those two worlds together and write a book that sort of pulled back the curtain on the process and demystify it, so to speak. There's so many people who, when they come to you and they're going through a divorce, this may be their first time ever working with an attorney, and they're scared. They see their name on the top of a legal document, and they see a case number that sometimes goes on for miles, it seems like, and they're scared. And what I wanted to do is write a book that broke everything down, that gave 2 or 3 key points to remember at the end of each chapter. At the end of the book, I have a glossary. I have examples of some of the legal documents that I mentioned in the book. Some of the terms of art are bolded throughout the text. So if somebody is reading it, and of course, you and I can talk to each other and we speak the same language, but really thinking about the reader's perspective, I wanted to make the book, certainly it's available on audiobook too, but I wanted to make this as a, sort of a guide, a reference guide. And one other thing I want to note about the book, the proceeds that we receive from book sales, they're donated to a domestic violence shelter in Northeast Florida. So I'm not trying to, use this as a supplemental source of income. I want to help people through the process. I want to be a thought leader, and certainly giving back to those people who were in this situation is why I wrote the book.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And I think that's very, very necessary. And, not always, but more often than not, it is the wife who's um, less informed or less involved in or less controlling of the money. And so when you get into one of these things, where, if someone is of a higher net worth, which, I guess that definition depends on the way you think of it, but it's generally at least seven figures, probably eight or nine. That seems to be even more of the case sometimes. So, well, so tell me, you kind of morphed during your career, maybe is a way to put it. Tell me a little bit about, you sounds like you were a divorce litigator for a while, then you got into this. How did you kind of think about doing that? How did that come about?
Yeah, great question. So all the way back in 2008, when I think I was 28 years old, I represented my now business partner, Glenn, in his divorce. And whenever I represented somebody in a high net worth situation, of course, as you know, it's not the lawyer's job to, set them up with a wealth advisor or a new CPA. Generally one spouse has the more dominant relationship with those other professionals. And I always want to make sure that, I just didn't only do the minimal job, but really help set somebody up for success. And Glenn was somebody that I would refer people who needed a wealth advisor to. And over the years, I kept getting exceptional feedback from him. And I studied business and was always very interested in personal finance from a young age. And 5 years after his case was over, he took me to lunch, not with the intent of us ever working together, but he's just super passionate about what he did, or what he does. And I jokingly said to him, well, gosh, if things are going that great, why don't you hire me? And it sort of hit him like a ton of bricks because, he was dealing with the divorce issue so much more frequently. And he said, you provide an excellent service. You're very competent. You have transferable skills, and you can also offload all of this divorce work and questions and, the issues that pop up that take up so much of my time. I'd just rather have you take it and run with it. So that's how it happened.
And that's interesting. It makes a lot of sense. It's really a perfect fit in my mind. Here in Texas, we typically have folks that it's kind of one or the other. You're kind of a CPA and you go into that field, or you're a lawyer and you go into the litigation field. And it would be really nice to have some of both, actually.
And Brian, where I think my greatest strength, as far as it tends to be working with the lawyers, I no longer want to be an advocate. That's your job. And I work with financial professionals that, God bless them, they wanted to help, but they also, by being overzealous, made our jobs more difficult. They would sometimes, tell the clients like, hey, or I ran this projection and this is how much money you need. And, in a combination of alimony, or imputed investment income, there was really no way possible that could be a potential outcome in the case. And I just think, I say, if you and I are working together, I tell my client, listen, Brian's the quarterback. Okay. And if you ask me a question and I think it calls for legal advice, I say that's a Brian question, write that down, ask him, but also ask him these other questions. And if it's a procedural question and I can answer, why is Brian asking for my tax returns for 5 years, or why does he want to know, how much retained earnings my company has? Well, I can tell them why, but I'm very, very respectful of my role and your role and supporting the lawyer.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense to me too. So tell me about the kind of roles that financial experts are going to play in a case like this. What are the roles? What do they do? What are they helpful for? And maybe also what are their limits? I think you talked a little bit about them. They're not lawyers necessarily, unless they are a lawyer, but generally they're not. So how does that work? How do we play? How do we have a team? Sort of, you used a quarterback term, among lawyers and financial experts.
Sure. And Brian, I think you see this in some of your higher net worth cases. These are very savvy and sophisticated individuals with good business judgment, and they don't want to spend unnecessary money on lawyers and expert witnesses and so on and so forth. So I really find that a lot of my work is done on the front end in some of the larger cases where, we consult and we're working collaboratively with the estate attorneys and with the CPAs and really trying to, help the parties come up with a framework of what an equitable settlement should look like. I'm working on one case right now that is approaching the nine-figure amount, and it's the most complicated estate planning situation you could ever think of, with cuberts and slats and islets, and for anyone listening, those are acronyms for complicated irrevocable trust strategies and estate planning mechanisms. But we work together and we try to solve those problems on the front end before they even file. And so, working with the other financial professionals to help craft an agreement that's equitable. And of course, as you know, and people who are listening may or may not know, but if you settle your case, you can divide the pie in a way that the court may not necessarily be able to divide it. So in some of these larger cases, there may be some desire to, you know, think of a way where you keep a property that's in a cubert and value the retained use period or something like that. Things that, maybe over the head of anybody who would be a fact finder deciding the case. So I do a lot of that. And then there's a lot of, sometimes I testify and I talk about, hey, look, this person wants alimony. Here's the liquid assets that they should come into based on the settlement. Here's how a reasonable person would construct that portfolio. Here's a reasonable rate of return. Here's a withdrawal rate that would be equitable. So this person, at the end of their life expectancy maintains the same principal balance as when they started, and they don't run out of money. And then, another thing is basically just translating the settlement agreement for my client. Okay, here's the result of your divorce settlement. What does this mean for you on a month-to-month basis now that you're in charge of running your life?
Yeah, that makes absolute sense. And I mean, you're exactly right. Those are complex issues. I'm not sure I understand exactly every one of those acronyms, but that's why we have somebody like yourself to help us understand all of that. So, um, what about pre and post marital agreements, prenups or postnups, as most people call them? I see those increasingly commonly these days. I don't know if that's because of my client mix is that way, or because people are doing those more frequently, or both, or some other factor. I'm not really sure, but maybe you can talk for a little bit about how that can affect things. And I guess the other part of that is I've had some people come to me and say, we really don't want to go through a divorce, but we do want to deal with our money, and let's do a postnup and see what happens, right? So maybe you can talk about how you've dealt with those and what you've seen, if you've seen any trends or what you think is good and bad practice for those.
Yeah, excellent questions. So prenups generally, when somebody comes to me, they're in the middle of a divorce, so it's a little too late to talk about a prenup at that point, assuming they don't have one already. Um, the postnup, certainly if there's a chance at reconciliation, I think, in tandem with the lawyer, you let the client know that that's certainly an option. If there's some reason to, set in stone the party's financial arrangement, maybe that will help regain some trust from one party to the other. Then that's certainly a viable option. Now, when somebody gets divorced and, I'm, me or my firm is selected to help them manage their money on an ongoing basis, certainly prenuptial agreements is part of the discussion. I regularly tell my clients, who come into substantial assets, that you've got to start talking about a prenup with a future partner well before you even send out save the date arrangements, or notices to anybody who might be invited to a wedding ceremony. And I've written extensively actually on marital agreements. So, everybody, when they hear prenup, they immediately think about a divorce. Well, there's two ways a marriage can end: divorce, of course, and then death. And somebody in a second marriage, I argue, oftentimes one or both will bring children from a previous relationship into the marriage. So I feel like it's a more productive and less emotional conversation when you approach a prenuptial agreement from the death perspective, instead of starting with what's going to happen if we divorce. And I should back up for a second, Brian, and let the listeners know that most people don't have a prenuptial agreement. So if they don't have a prenuptial agreement, then anybody who's married and gets divorced is subject to the state's one-size-fits-all laws. This is how the state is going to say that your partnership should be dissolved. Well, with a prenuptial agreement, you actually write your own law, so to speak, before you actually even get divorced. And certainly, there, just like with divorce, if you die without a will, there are intestate succession laws which say, okay, these are how the assets are going to be split up between a husband and a wife when they die without a will. So a prenup also has the ability to, essentially rewrite the intestate succession laws so you can have more of a say on where your assets go. Maybe you want them all to go to your children because your soon-to-be partner already has means of their own and they don't need your assets. Whereas if you didn't have a prenup, well, then that person, there's a certain amount generally that person would inherit, and they probably don't even need it.
Yeah, I agree. I think the issue of other adult children or other children, let's say a second or third marriage where one or both of you has got kids from a prior marriage, whether they're adults or kids, this is an underrated problem in life. And we're supposed to think, oh, that's my parents' money. We don't care, whatever. That's not the way most people think. And, especially with people living longer and longer, um, things being very complicated. I've seen a lot of stress in a second or third marriage from the other kids. And, well, my dad was well off and then he married this, blah, blah, blah lady. She was just after his money and she's after our inheritance. And, it causes bad feelings all the way around. I think it can actually end up a lot of times is where everybody's mad at everybody. It's just not a good thing. And I mean, you're probably almost better having that prenup discussion, especially with the second marriage, with your kids too, kind of like, look, I got $20 million, right? I got two kids. I'm going to put 5 million in a trust for each one of you kids. And I'm going to have the other 10 million that I'm going to live off of, because I need money to live off of the rest of my life. And I'm going to do a prenup with my new wife and she's not getting more than 1 million of it. And you guys are going to be the beneficiaries afterward. Whatever the case is, I was making up numbers, but to me, that seems like that would make everybody a lot, I don't know about happier, but at least understand where they stand and not feel like there's this constant battle for, you know, the new wife is making my dad go on expensive vacations and, they're making him buy an expensive house and putting her name on it, blah, 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 versus if it was up front, maybe you don't have those problems. I mean, who wants to be that person, right? Who's, you know, 80 years old on your second marriage, and your kids are pissed at you and your grandkids are pissed at you because they think you married this other lady, and I was going to use an unpleasant term, but that they might say, but I won't. And and she's taking the money away, and then the second wife thinks you're sending it all to the kids, and nobody knows, and everybody just assumes the worst. And that, to me, that sounds like a recipe to die with angry children and grandkids and a bitter wife, and die alone or something like that. I don't know. It doesn't sound like it's a good deal, but it's a lack of planning, right? And lack of being upfront and clear with everybody about, this is what's going to happen, guys. Like, look, here it is. To me, that's the way I just see it more and more these days, it seems like.
Yeah, and I think every agreement, there's got to be a win-win for both parties. Brian, what is your biggest issue? What concerns you the most? Okay, let's talk about a way to put that to bed so you can enter into this new union and not ever have to worry about the thing that's stressing you out the most, or mitigate that risk in some way that's amenable to the other side. Um, there's ways to do it, and it can actually be a very positive thing. While this isn't technically divorce related, I just look at the Jimmy Buffett probate litigation that's going on right now, and I just wrote a piece on that too. And I think that boils down to lack of planning, and Mrs. Buffett probably not understanding the estate plan and the role that the co-trustee was going to play. And yeah, you hit the nail on the head, Brian.
I don't know about that. Tell me kind of a quick version of it. I saw that there was a street named Jimmy Buffett Way or something in Florida recently. I saw that, but I didn't hear about the litigation. That sounds much more interesting to a lawyer like me.
So Jimmy Buffett passed away almost 2 years ago to the date, and he has this whole business empire. Well, his longtime accountant and financial advisor was named the co-trustee to manage the Margaritaville business empire. And he did that because he, didn't think, or, this is what's reported, that his wife was sophisticated enough to run that business empire. Meanwhile, the CPA and the financial advisor has been doing it forever. And she thinks that she should be getting more money on a monthly basis from that entity. Of course, he has another story. So she files a suit against him in Los Angeles. He's filed a lawsuit against her in Palm Beach County, Florida. So you've got, two different lawsuits in two different states, all the way across the country. And, you sit there and you scratch your head. Gosh, how could somebody so successful with, presumably the best advisors around them find themselves in this situation? But we see it happen all the time. But again, it's to your larger point of being upfront, communicating, running what I call a lifeboat drill. Like, okay, the doomsday scenario is here. Let's, run a simulation. Let's implement our estate plan. Let's implement our prenup. Is the result of the implementation what you wanted? Okay. If not, how do we fix it? How do we make sure that everybody's on the same page?
Yeah, that makes totally good sense. And it's a good point with Jimmy Buffett to wrap up on that point, is that, yeah, you don't know if you're going to divorce your wife or die. One of you's going to die, but it's legally, it's the same outcome, right? Because the probate court has to deal with your finances if you haven't opted out of them and made planning. But, and it's a different feeling maybe, but it's the same outcome. So anyway, well, thank you so much. I appreciate it. That's all we have for today. If you like what you've heard today and want to do us a favor and leave a review, we'd appreciate it. We appreciate all the feedback, especially when it helps better the podcast. If you have any questions for Patrick or are interested in purchasing his book or talking to him or retaining his firm or anything like that, his information will be in our show notes. And Patrick, thank you very much for joining us today. And I'm Brian Walters. Thanks for listening.
For information about the topics covered in today's episode and more, you can visit our website at waltersgilbreth.com. Thanks for tuning in to today's episode of For Better, Worse, or Divorce, where we post new episodes every first and third Wednesday. Do you have a topic you want discussed or a question for our hosts? Email us at podcast@waltersgilbreth.com. Thanks for listening. Until next time.